I didn't really grow up with Final Fantasy in the way a lot of JRPG fans did. Maybe it's because I mostly just had Nintendo consoles until my 20s, but I was generally only vaguely aware of it, and to this day, I've only played a handful of titles from the series. One of the first ones I did play though was the big one, Final Fantasy VII. I've since played Remake as well, and while I'm obviously aware that Remake is very much its own entity, I'm going to treat the two as broadly interchangeable for the sake of this video, because I think you can get much the same essentials from both. Although the relationship between the two is a really interesting topic in its own right. I should also point out at the top here that I haven't played Crisis Core or any of the other spin-offs, so this is purely going to be focusing on the main game. Sorry, Zach. Final Fantasy VII is almost certainly the most famous Final Fantasy title, and is synonymous with the series as a whole for many people. Since its release, a lot of its plot has tended to get boiled down and simplified to the relationship between Cloud and Sephiroth. See both characters' appearances in the Kingdom Hearts games, for instance. But of course, the reason the story works is because that personal conflict, while it is important, is tied in with wider themes and issues. The focus early on is much more on Shinra and how they're destroying the planet. Sephiroth doesn't really gain importance until later on, and even then, that story thread emerges out of the struggle against Shinra. Sephiroth is a creation of Shinra, and his ultimate big evil plan is in part a hijacking of their big evil plan. This is worth thinking about. How do the personal stories and goals of your players tie in with wider things going on in the world? Maybe one of your players is searching for a missing parent. Well, maybe that parent was kidnapped by the big bad evil guy. Or maybe they were in that city that went missing or got destroyed for mysterious reasons. Maybe one of them wants to reclaim their ancestral blade. What happened to that ancestral blade? Could it be something to do with the terrible Underdark catastrophe that you have brewing? It sounds basic, and it is. But it's so easy to overlook these storytelling basics when you've got a billion other things on your mind, and when the story is unfolding gradually and through improvisation, a week at a time. But tying together your characters' personal stories with the wider world is a great way to get your players invested in your world. But then, you might ask, what about selfish characters? The ones who are only in it for themselves, who won't look to get involved in wider stories? Well, FF7 has a handy lesson for us here. At the beginning of the game, Cloud is just along for the ride. He's on the Mako bombing mission purely because he's getting paid. As he makes clear, he doesn't care about the cause. As we'll subsequently find out though, he does care about Tifa. And it's made clear that she's what really got him involved, with true believer Barret and the gang. His claim to only care about money is, at least in part, a defensive facade. Not only is it classic dark hero stuff, very 90s, it's a great example of how to bring a protagonist, or say a party, into a story. You can't immediately ask them to care about the big issues facing the setting, that central conflict that you've thought about so much, but you can use elements of their backstory. A childhood friend, that missing parent from earlier, fleeting contact with some kind of secret society. Essentially, as I've already said, make sure their ideas for their character are tying together with your ideas for your setting and story. Couple that with a paid mission, and pretty much any player is going to leap at what you're offering them. That's how you start to sow the seeds. Give them NPCs like Jessie that they can care about, whose struggles might become important to them, and link those struggles into the main conflict that you've got brewing. That will help them, both players and their characters, to care about that conflict. If you do it carefully and gradually, it'll happen before you or your players know it. This is not to railroad players, or to reduce their agency, which you always want to be wary of, but it's a good way to induce them into caring about your ideas, especially if you've got the kind of group that just wants to hit orcs and make silly jokes. Nothing wrong with that, but if you're finding yourself struggling to get them to care about your overall plot and setting, give them a Mako bombing mission. Even if it doesn't work in terms of hooking them into the world, they'll have made an impact on your world. And that will have consequences, both for them and for the world around them. I use a lot of music from games in my sessions. I find it's perfect. Game music is meant to be played on a loop, it's meant to be there in the background, to set a mood. All the kinds of things you want when running a TTRPG session. I have a few game series that I go back to a lot for music, some of which I'll talk about in the future. Usually they're games and series that I know well, so I can pick out the kind of mood that I want to set. Final Fantasy is not necessarily one of the series that I use a lot, but it does have some good examples of one of my favourite uses of music: character themes and leitmotifs. I find these really useful in denoting certain specific NPCs, making sure they have a lot of impact, that the players pay attention to them. The best use of this I've ever seen was a game I was a player in a few years ago. There was a recurring NPC, a villainous character who our party found themselves making deals with, a powerful hag. And the DM had this theme music for her. I'm not sure what it was, which is helpful in itself, because it means I had no other associations for it. But it was this really unsettling modernist-style discordant piece, very high strings, that kind of thing. And a couple of times, he would suddenly switch to that piece of music without warning, and it would put us all on edge, because it meant the hag was around. That's something I've always wanted to replicate. But you need the right NPC, and the right piece of music. You also have to be a bit sparing with it. I only really use character themes for major NPCs and particularly important or powerful ones, who need to A, be memorable, and B, have a really substantial impact. Now, at this point I'll ask any of my players in my current campaign who are watching to skip to the conclusion of this video, because this is potentially spoilery. Likewise, I'm going to lightly spoil aspects of Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus, so if you're planning on playing that soon, be wary. So of course, this being the Final Fantasy VII video, we can't talk about character themes without talking about this. I love One Winged Angel. It's just so much, as I'm told the kids say. And it has exactly that effect I've mentioned with the hag earlier, of putting you on guard and warning you that you should be very afraid right now, that this individual will mess you up if you're not careful. Now I'm currently running a slightly homebrewed version of Descent into Avernus from my usual group. I'm running it in a weird way, including combining it with another adventure, so they're not in Avernus yet. But once they are, I'm planning on making sure they have several encounters, fleeting but memorable ones, with Zariel, Archduke of Avernus, and the character around whom that whole adventure revolves. In much the same way that in Curse of Strahd, you're supposed to have multiple encounters with Strahd, to build him up as a character. Now Zariel used to be an angel, before she, fell, as angels sometimes do. So, guess what piece of music I'm using for her? One of the things that's useful about One Winged Angel is that it comes in a bunch of different versions. There's the original version, the orchestral version used in other games, Kingdom Hearts for instance. The electric guitar-y Advent Children version. And most interestingly for my purposes, the remake version, which is instantly recognisable, but holds off on giving you the full vocal melody until 4.5 minutes in, so you get this lovely build-up. So I have a bunch of options for whenever she appears, based on how much of an immediate threat I want her to seem in that moment. The remake version I'm saving for a specific moment. Skip ahead about 10 seconds if you don't want spoilers for the adventure, when the party delve into memories to see what happened to cause her to fall, which will hopefully be a really intense moment with a lot of build-up. It's honestly one of the things I'm most excited for in that adventure, and it's largely because of the music. It's all about atmosphere. and it's about building up this specific character to seem like the very big deal she should be. Film and game composers use music like this all the time, to give you an aural sense of who a character is and what their place in the story is. So why not borrow their expertise for your game? Probably because I came to it so late. I think Final Fantasy is a series that I appreciate more than I love. It hasn't gotten into my bones and my soul the way the previous series I've covered have. But that doesn't mean I can't appreciate the things that make it work, and steal them. It's not hard to see why FF7 in particular is so enduring, and we as DMs should absolutely make use of its lessons. Thanks for watching. As always, don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe for more like it. This is one where I'm particularly interested to hear from you actually. I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who've gotten a lot of D&D inspiration out of Final Fantasy in general, and particularly 7. The texture of the settings in the game, particularly Midgar, and the changing party dynamic are two things that I can imagine making fertile ground. So please do leave a comment with anything that you think makes for good D&D fodder in the game. All of the stuff that I've missed out. Until next time, goodbye friends.